Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I'm covering the very strange case of Peter Bray and the murder of Thomas Pyle, which took place in Durham in 1882. Now I think this will be quite a long story as there is a lot of detail to go into and the story spans 2 years. However, I also feel that there is some information that's missing, but I hope you will find it interesting and stick with it until the end. There is very little information about the past life of Peter Bray. As a miner who often lodged in different areas, he was quite difficult to pin down prior to his time living in Durham. He was around 32 years old at the time the crime was committed, so would have been born in around 1850. His place of birth and parents are unknown. And as said, he worked as a miner in Durham. However, in 1882, there was a strike on at the colliery that Peter was working at, so he was one of many miners who were not currently working, although not all of the miners were on strike. Thomas Pyle, the victim, was said to be around 50 years old at the time of his death, so would have been born in around 1832. His place of birth and parents are unknown. He had been married, possibly to a lady by the name of Harriet, and the couple had at least 5 children together. Thomas, in 1882, was a widower and was working as a miner in Durham. He was described as a blackleg as he was working when the majority of miners were on strike. The strike itself had resulted in several of the miners who had continued to work being attacked by those who were on strike. Some had been seriously injured, but no one had been found guilty of any crimes. Before we go any further, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. It really is very much appreciated. And it is completely free to subscribe. It doesn't cost you any money, but it really does help to support the channel. And as always, I just want to add that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify, so I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. And I just want to add that I have now recorded this 4 times. The 3rd time I was absolutely quite good, but I forgot to save it, and when I come to put the video together, it wasn't there. So this is my 4th time, so I hope that I do just as good a job as I did on the 3rd one, which nobody's going to hear, but never mind. Thank you anyway. I hope you will enjoy it. On the night of April the 1st, 1882, Thomas Pyle had spent some time in several of the local public houses in Durham. He eventually decided to head for home, carrying a parcel of clothing with him that he had bought earlier that day. He was travelling alone, and it's not entirely clear what time he began his journey home, but it may have been just after 9:30 p.m. Later that night, he was found lying on the ground in an area close to a place known as Prior's Path in Durham. It was thought that he was too drunk to walk, so some passers-by had helped him down the road a little and propped him up beside some railings and left him there. Stephen Spirit, on his way to work in the very early hours of Sunday morning, April the 2nd, noticed Thomas on the ground near to the railings but thought that he was drunk. He went over and found he was cold to the touch, and he realised now that the man was not drunk, he was in fact dead. And he went in search of a policeman. Inspector Webster went with Stephen to where he said he had found Thomas. When he arrived, he examined the body. He found that Thomas had a cut on his chin and some marks on his head, and his neckerchief was pulled very tightly round his neck, and a piece of broken railing was lying under his body. Inspector Webster arranged for the body of Thomas Pyle to be taken to the Durham County Hospital, where a doctor would be sent for, and after the doctor had examined Thomas, it became clear that his death had not been an accident. The police then began their inquiries in an attempt to find out who had been responsible for the death of Thomas Pyle, but despite extensive inquiries, no person had been arrested by the time the inquest took place. The inquest was held at the Durham County Hospital on April the 3rd before Coroner Graham. Robert Pyle said he was a miner and he had identified the body as being that of his father Thomas, who was 50 years old, and he said his father worked at Ushaw Moor Colliery. Coroner Graham said the inquest would be adjourned to allow the police to gather more evidence. This hearing had been held simply to allow a burial to take place and so that the jury could view the location where the body had been found. He said the inquest would resume in 2 weeks' time. Although the coroner mentioned a burial, I did not find any evidence of a funeral for Thomas Pyle. As with many cases, it's unclear if the family would have had the money to pay for the funeral. So again, this may have been a pauper's funeral. I did not find any evidence of a headstone for Thomas anywhere in the Durham area. The inquest resumed on April the 17th, 1882. Although the location is not given, it was most likely held at the Durham County Hospital again, and it was again before Coroner Graham. The first witness called was Inspector Webster. He said he had been taken to the place where Thomas had been found by Stephen's spirit. When he arrived, it was clear that Thomas was already dead. He said he found him lying face down on the ground, and a long piece of railing was underneath his body. He had a cut on his chin and other marks on his body, but nothing that at first seemed to suggest a serious assault had taken place. He said close to the body of Thomas Pyle he had found 2 pennies and a piece of newspaper with string attached to it, as if it had been wrapped around a parcel of some kind. He didn't find anything in Thomas's pockets other than a handkerchief. He said he had loosened the neckerchief around Thomas's neck, and he had then assisted in carrying his body to the Durham County Hospital. After the doctor had examined the body, he had been told that Thomas had not died by natural causes, and investigations began into who may have caused his death. He said he had returned to Prior's Path the following day and noted footprints in the soil around where the body had been found. However, the ground was quite dry, and they were not very obvious to the eye. He said he believed there had been more than one person present at the scene, and some of the footprints seemed to head off in the direction of the nearby fields. Dr. Jepson said he had been called to the Durham County Hospital to examine the body of Thomas Pyle. He said there were many bruises and marks on his head and face, and the cut to his chin went down to the bone. He said he felt that great violence had been used on Thomas's body, and that his death had not been caused by him being drunk or by natural causes. Dr. Jepson said he had also performed the post-mortem on the body of Thomas Pyle, assisted by Dr. Oliver. He said he found blood in the lungs and also in the brain. He said that it appeared that a heavy blow had been struck, which had hit the neck in the area of the windpipe, thus causing serious damage to the internal workings of the neck, and this had resulted in Thomas Pyle being unable to breathe. The cause of death, in his professional opinion, was not strangulation, as had been first thought, but was caused by a very violent blow to the neck, causing suffocation. When asked, he stated that the wooden railing produced was very likely the weapon used to cause the injury that he had described when it was used with great force. Dr. Oliver spoke only to state that he agreed with the evidence given by Dr. Jepson, and the doctors then passed around a glass jar containing parts of Thomas's windpipe to demonstrate just how serious his injuries had been, as these injuries would not have been visible externally. Jane Simpson said she worked at the Neville Hotel in North Road in Durham. She said on the night of April the 1st, Thomas had come into the public house, where he had 2 glasses of whisky. She said he had 2 parcels with him, and she had taken them and wrapped them both in newspaper and tied them together as one parcel with some string. She said Thomas left a little before 9 p.m. She said he was already the worse for drink when he left, but she felt that he was quite able to walk. But it was pointed out to the jury that once in the night air, he may not have been quite so capable. George Wilson said he was a coachman at Red Hills Villa. He said on the night of April the 1st, he was walking down from Red Hills when he saw a man lying on the ground near to Flash Street. He said the man was quite drunk. He said to help with another man, they took him a little further down the road and set him down with his back to the wooden rails. He said the man, whom he now knew to be Thomas Pyle, was not able to walk at all. He said the time had been around 9:30 p.m. John Anderson of Durham said he had been heading home on April the 1st by way of Flash Street. He said he found Thomas Pyle sitting near the Red Hills Villa. He said he had a parcel with him wrapped in, he thought, newspaper. He said he raised his hand to him as if he wanted help to get up, but then put it back down again. He said a few moments after this, 2 other men came up and they helped him down the road a little way. They struggled with him and left him sitting near a hedge. 2 other men then moved him further and he was left sitting with his back to the railings. He said he thought this must have been at around 10 p.m. He said he did not see Thomas again after this as he continued on his way home. Joseph Strong said he lived at Crossgate Moor. He said on the night of April the 1st he had been heading home via Flash Street when he found a man on the ground. The previous witness, John Anderson, had asked his help to lift the man up, and he said he had tried to do so, but Thomas was not capable of moving his legs at all. He was so badly drunk. They were able to move him a little way and left him sitting by the wooden railings. He said he headed home but returned a few minutes later to meet his younger brother. He said the man had not moved in all the time that he had been away. He said they passed again at around 11:30 p.m. and the man was still in the same place and he had his parcel tucked under his arm. He said he did not see him again after this. Ralph Hughes said he was a miner at Bear Park Colliery. He said on the night of April the 1st he had seen Thomas Pyle at around 7 p.m. in one of the public houses. He said another man had been in the pub at the time and Thomas had sworn at him. He said the man called Thomas a blackleg and said he would knock his face off. Ralph said he did not know who this man was and had not seen him since. He thought the man had a Lancashire accent. He said the man left before Thomas and Thomas was fairly drunk when he had seen him at 7 p.m. He said at around 10 p.m. he saw Thomas lying on the ground. He said he was going to try and pick him up, but he said his companion said not to as a man was watching him from behind the hedge and it might be a policeman and he might think they were trying to rob Thomas of his parcel. He said he did not see him again after this. Thomas Harrison of Crossgate Moor said he was heading home on the night of the 1st. He said it would be at around 11:15 p.m. when he came across Thomas Pyle on the ground. He said he seemed to be very drunk. He said he did not speak to him. He passed by and a little further up the road he passed 3 other men. These men were talking and he heard one man say, "I'll cut some of their throats." But he said he did not know who the they were that the man was referring to. And he was also not able to identify the men he had seen. He said one of the men was lying on the ground and he went over and tried to pull him up, but the man would not budge, and he said he felt that him and his 2 companions were pretending to be drunk. William Blair, who said he worked for Walter Wilson, said he was passing near Flash Street on the way to Crossgate Moor when he came across Thomas on the ground. He said this was around 11 p.m. He said he told the man to get up, but he didn't seem able. He said he did not see a broken railing or any sign of blood. He saw 2 more men pass by a little later, but did not know who they were. Robert Watson said he was a miner and was heading home at around 11:30 p.m. when he saw Thomas Pyle on the ground. He said at that time he did not know the man was Thomas. He said he also passed 2 other miners who lived near him, and they said they would follow him home a little later as they were not heading home yet. He said he spoke to Thomas, but he did not reply. A little further up the bank he thought he heard some voices from behind the hedge, but he did not know what they were saying. He said he last saw Thomas at around 11:45 p.m. William Smith and Robert Williamson, both miners, gave similar evidence to Robert Watson. However, only William believed he had heard someone talking behind the hedge. William Dodds and George Woff both spoke of heading home past Flash Street and seeing Thomas at around 11:30 p.m. George Woff seemed a little confused and spoke of seeing men in 2 different locations and not knowing who they were or if they were the same men, and at one point saying he did not remember saying anything about seeing 2 of these men, but if it was in the police officer's notes then he must have said it. He was then asked if someone had told him not to say anything, and he said they had not. The coroner then spoke to him, saying it was very odd how the important part of his statement he now seemed to have forgotten, and George said, "Well, I have." He was then told that it was hard to believe he had forgotten what he had said, and George said he'd been baffled at the time, and ended by saying he must have actually been mistaken. The coroner said he simply did not believe him. Joseph Patterson said he was a miner at Ushamoor Colliery. He said he had been out on strike for around 6 weeks. He said Thomas Pyle had gone back to work and was considered a blackleg. He said some of the miners who had gone back to work had been badly used. One man by the name of Bailey had been attacked and 3 men had been arrested and charged with attacking him, but the case had been dismissed. He said on the night of the 1st he had been near Flash Street on his way home. He had seen Thomas leaning against a fence. He said he had spoken to him and asked him if he was going home, and he said Thomas said he wasn't. He said he left him there and went on his way. He said Thomas had a parcel under his arm. He said he had passed 1 or 2 other men who had given evidence earlier in the inquest, and he said he had headed home and his mother had let him inside. He did not know what time he got home, but he had not left the house again that night. The following day he had been told what had happened to Thomas. He said a man by the name of Robert Robinson had told him, as he had been in the area when Thomas's body had been carried to the Durham County Hospital. John Dodds, Thomas Wilkinson and John Dawson all spoke of seeing Thomas on the ground near Pariah's Path. They all said they had refused to help him, as being a blackleg they may have ended up fighting with him and did not want to do so. Frank Mead said he had been in the area of Flash Street on the night of April 1st. He said he had seen some men, he did not know who they were, on the road close to where Thomas had been found. He said he heard one of the men say, "I'll cut some of their throats." Like an earlier witness, he was also unable to identify the man who had spoken. Stephen Spirit said he was a labourer at Durham. He said on April the 2nd at around 6 a.m. he was passing the area near Flash Street when he saw the body of a man lying on the ground. At first he believed the man was just drunk, but on going over to help him up he found that his hands were freezing cold and he knew something was very wrong. He said he went in search of a police officer and returned with Inspector Webster. He said he noticed that Thomas was lying on top of a railing. He said he had helped to carry Thomas to the county hospital. He did not really notice any injuries, but he noticed that Thomas's face seemed quite blue. He did not see any signs of a parcel near where he had found Thomas first thing that morning. The coroner then spoke to the jury. He stated that they had been given evidence to prove that Thomas Pyle was still alive and uninjured at midnight on April the 1st, so the attack must have taken place between then and 6 a.m. the following morning. He said Thomas still had in his possession the parcel he had been carrying at midnight, but it was missing by 6 a.m, and he felt that those responsible were clearly attempting to make this look like robbery rather than murder. But it had been a most dreadful attack, and the police had done all they could to find those responsible, and it was his opinion that this could be nothing more than a case of willful murder, and if the jury reached this verdict, then he would write to the Home Secretary, as he felt very sure that a reward would be offered for any information leading to the capture of the murderer or the murderers. The jury retired for only around 5 minutes before returning a verdict of willful murder against some person or persons unknown. Whether or not the Home Secretary approved a reward is not entirely clear. However, the police offered a £100 reward for information leading to the capture of those responsible for the death of Thomas Pyle, and the owner of Ushamoor Colliery, where Thomas worked, also offered a further £100, which made a total of £200, which today would be around £31,000. So the reward money back in 1882 would have been an incredible amount for anyone, and it no doubt did encourage people to come forward with information. The police continued with their inquiries, and they clearly had someone in mind as being responsible for the murder of Thomas Pyle, as in July of 1883, almost 16 months later, they arrested Peter Bray, who had been in Durham prison for another offence. Peter was taken before the magistrates, and after a special hearing, he was officially charged with the willful murder of Thomas Pyle and was committed for trial. The trial took place in Durham in November of 1883 before Mr. Justice Day. Peter Bray pleaded not guilty to the charge of willful murder. A lot of the evidence at the trial was very similar to that given at the inquest. However, several witnesses now stated that they had identified Peter Bray as being at the location on the night of April the 1st. So the information that I add now will be mostly concerning this new evidence. Joseph Smith said he worked for Jackson and Company in Durham, and he said on April the 1st, Thomas Pyle, who we already knew, had come into his shop and bought some children's clothing, which he had wrapped for him, and he then left the shop. He said Thomas had bought 2 shirts. He did not state if Thomas was drunk at the time he had been in the shop. John Dodds said he had seen Thomas on the night of April the 1st. He said he also saw a group of other men in the area where Thomas was lying, one he now knew to be Peter Bray. He said after they had walked a little distance further on, Peter had asked who it was on the ground, and someone had told him it was Thomas Pyle, and Peter had said to the other men in the group with him, "Let's go back and do for him." But the other men had refused to go, and he said that Peter had called them all soft. After this, John said Peter went over the hedge into a field. He broke a piece of railing off and took it with him. He saw him heading back in the direction where Thomas had been lying. He said he saw him again later that night, he thought between 11 p.m. and midnight, and Peter was now carrying a parcel. When asked, he said he had not told all he knew before, as he had been afraid of being badly used. He had said that he had not seen any other men in the area that night, but he said this was not true. He said he had come forward to tell all, as a police officer had come to see him and told him that he must tell the truth or face going to prison himself. He said yes, he had seen the boards offering the £200 reward money, but he did not know if he would be entitled to a share of the money or not. John Dawson of Hebburn said he had seen Peter Bray on the night in question. He had spoken to him, and Peter had told him that Thomas had sworn at him and he wanted to go back and murder him. He said someone had told Peter not to, but he then went over the hedge, taking the broken railing with him, and disappeared from sight. He too said he saw him a little later, and he had a parcel under his coat. John Dawson continued saying that around a week later he saw Peter Bray at Durham Marketplace, and he had come up to him and started talking about Thomas Pyle. He said Peter told him that he had climbed back over the hedge on the 1st of April, and he'd been near where Thomas had been lying, and he had felled him with the railing. He said Peter told him Thomas tried to shout out, but he hit him again, and that stopped him. John Dawson said he had told Peter it was a shame the man had to be murdered, and Peter had told him it was not a shame for a man like him. When asked, he said he had not told all he knew at the inquest, as he was afraid to tell, as he thought he too might get badly used himself. David Little of Jarrow said on the night of April the 1st he had been in Durham with Peter Bray. He said they had seen Thomas Pyle lying on the ground, and he had spoken to him, and he had told them to pass by. He said a few moments later they met up with several other men, and someone asked if they had seen Thomas, and he said they had. He said Peter then said he wanted to go back and do for him, but someone told him not to. He said after this, Peter went over the hedge, taking the broken railing with him, and he did not see him again that night. He said the next day he saw Peter and asked if it was true that Thomas had been murdered, and he said Peter told him that it was. Again, as with John Dawson, when asked, David said he had not told all he knew before, as he was afraid of being attacked himself. But when a police officer came to see him recently and asked him to give evidence, now that Peter was in custody, he had agreed to tell all. It was then noted that George Woff was unable to attend the trial due to illness. George was the witness at the inquest who seemed unable to tell the truth, and it was thought he had been afraid, so it is possible that his illness was a way of not having to come to trial and tell the truth then either. George Race of Penshaw said in 1882 he lived at Bear Park and Peter Bray lodged with him. He said Peter returned home on the night in question between midnight and 1 a.m. He said he told him that he had put a black leg through tonight. I gave him one bat and a kick and sent him sprawling. George said he didn't know at the time who the man was. He said Peter had brought 2 shirts into the house with him, and he had told him not to bring stolen things there, and Peter had then burnt them. When asked, he said Peter told him not to tell anyone what he had said about what he had done, and he had not done so, as he was afraid that if he did, he would end up the same as Thomas Pyle. He said Peter left his lodgings in June of 1882 to join the militia in Hartlepool. James Race, a brother of the last witness, also of Penshaw, gave very similar evidence, also adding that Peter had threatened him to keep his mouth shut or he would be given the same as he had given Thomas. Inspector Webster said after the murder, Peter Bray had been spoken to. He had stated that he'd never been away from Bear Park all that day and that he had been back in his lodgings house at by 7 p.m. on the night of the murder. Later, when he had been arrested, he had stated, "I am innocent of the crime. I did not even know the man. He is a stranger to me." Sergeant Burrows said after Peter Bray had been officially charged, he had made a statement saying that he had been in the area that night and that he had met up with several other men. He said he had told him that he had gone over the hedge and the railing had broken as he went over and he had kept it in his hand, but he said no one could swear that he had used it to strike Thomas Pyle. Several other witnesses who had not given evidence at the inquest all spoke of seeing Thomas Pyle lying on the ground. None said they saw him injured, and several also said they had seen other men in the area that night, but none of these witnesses said anything about seeing Peter Bray that night. William Carr, who was a miner, said he had spoken to George Race, and he had told him that Peter Bray was innocent of the crime, but that if he, George Race, could get him hanged, he would do so, and he might then get the £200 reward money as well. William was asked when this conversation had taken place, and he said a week after the murder. He was then told that the reward money was not offered until the end of April, so more than a week after the murder, so George would not have known anything about the reward money when this alleged conversation took place. Mrs. Brooks of Durham stated that George Race had told her that Peter Bray had robbed him, but that he knew enough about him to get him hanged. This ended all the evidence given, and Peter Bray did not give evidence on his own behalf. I did not find any details of the prosecution, the defence, or the judge's summing up, but the jury, after retiring for only 10 minutes, returned a verdict of guilty of wilful murder against Peter Bray. Before sentence was passed, Peter was asked if he had anything to say, and it was stated that he gave a long, rambling statement that made little sense, accusing the police of a conspiracy. The judge, now wearing the black cap, then spoke to Peter, stating that he'd been found guilty of the crime of wilful murder, and that the jury would have failed in their duty had they not found him guilty. He then sentenced Peter to death by hanging, and that his remains would be buried within the walls of Durham prison. Peter, on leaving the dock, gave a military salute to his friends who had been in the courtroom. It seems that no attempt was made to commute the sentence of death for Peter Bray, and the execution was set to take place on Monday, November the 19th, 1883. Prior to this, Peter had been visited in prison by several friends and his only known relative, his sister, and it was stated that on one of his friends leaving for the last time, Peter had said to him, "Goodbye, for on Monday I will have the rope around my neck." It was said he did not seem to show any fear for his impending fate. And Peter had also acknowledged the justice of the sentence passed upon him, and he'd also written a long letter to a friend, which was printed by the newspapers at the time. However, I have not added the details of this letter in this video, as it is rather long and a little rambling and hard to understand. On the morning of the execution, it was said that Peter had slept well and was visited by the Reverend Brown. The executioner in this case was a man by the name of Bartholomew Binns, who had arrived at Durham with his assistant, Mr. Swift, on the previous Saturday. The pillion part of the execution was not covered. However, it was said that Peter walked calmly and firmly to the scaffold. Reporters had been allowed to witness the execution, and twice while Peter was being placed on the drop, he had tried to attract their attention and get them to come forward, but they were not allowed to speak to him. The white cap was placed over Peter's head, the bolt was removed, and Peter fell, and death was said to be instant. After the usual time of 1 hour, the body was removed and placed into a plain coffin, and an inquest was held where it was stated that death had been due to strangulation caused by hanging. After this, Peter was buried within the grounds of the prison, with only those present and the prison guards and the map knowing where he was buried. After his death, some newspapers reported that Peter Bray had been in trouble with the police from a very young age, including spending several years in prison for robbery with violence, which it seems was another case where he had spent some time in hiding before being captured by new Superintendent Dunn in Newcastle. And it seems that he had been quite well known to Superintendent Dunn, who had spent a lot of his time arresting him for various different offences. And Peter was also described by one paper as being the worst of all desperados. I did not find any details of Thomas Pyle's children after 1883. I can only hope that the older children were able to take care of the younger ones, and that none of them ended up in the workhouse now that they were orphans. Although there are no photos of Bartholomew Binns, and this drawing that I have done is not the best, I wanted to add this little bit of information about him. He had been given the job as hangman after William Marwood had died in September of 1883. However, he was only in the job until March of 1884, having hanged 9 men and 2 women. He was frequently said to be drunk while working, and one prison doctor stated that he had no idea how to do the job correctly. His final hanging in March of 1884 in England was so badly handled, with the prisoner taking over 13 minutes to die, that Bartholomew was sacked a few days later. However, it seems he did not completely give up, as it was said that he later worked as an assistant to the hangman Thomas Scott in Ireland, and his very last hanging took place in 1901, and Bartholomew himself died in 1911. I just wanted to add that little bit of information in, as it was stated in the newspapers at the time that the death of Peter Bray was instantaneous, which was often something that they said, but it was frequently not true. Quite often it would take some considerable time for the prisoner to die, and I do believe that this was one of those cases where that would have been what happened, because of the executioner being Bartholomew Binns. This was a very confusing story. It seems at the original inquest, many of the miners who had given evidence had not told all they had known, all of them later saying that they had been too afraid to tell for fear that they would be attacked themselves. It's possible this may have been true. However, it was also possible that the offer of the £200 reward money had made some of the men come forward with details they had mysteriously forgotten earlier. Peter Bray himself did state he had been in the area and that he had broken the railing and carried it with him into the fields. However, he did not say to the police, or even in his confession letter, that he had actually attacked Thomas. He'd only ever said that the sentence was justified, which kind of does say that he was admitting it, but not exactly in as many words. And he does seem to be the kind of person who would have tried to stop anyone giving details about him, so it is possible that the witnesses who suddenly knew for sure it was him, after he'd been arrested, may truly have been afraid to speak sooner, knowing he was free then at the time to find them, whereas after his arrest he wasn't. No one saw him commit the crime, but we do have several people who stated he had told them he had done it, and others who saw him heading towards Thomas alone with a railing in his hand. We can only assume they were telling the truth, as Peter never seems to have completely admitted his guilt, as said before. So were the jury correct to find him guilty of murder? Well, to be completely honest, I wasn't entirely convinced at first, as he did seem as if it was people coming forward saying it was Peter, as they wanted the reward money. But as a few more details came to light, and the fact that he was known to attack others for the slightest thing, and the fact that he was probably drunk at the time and not thinking clearly, I did begin to believe that he was indeed the man responsible for the death of Thomas Pyle, and I think the jury had no other option than to find him guilty. But what do you think? Do you think the man responsible for the death of Thomas Pyle was Peter Bray, or do you think he was simply identified by many in the hope of gaining a share of the £200 reward money? Do you think he really did confess to the crime to some of his friends, or do you think they also made those stories up for their share of the money? And do you think the jury were correct to find him guilty, or should there have been some level of doubt, as no one actually saw him commit the crime? Do please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope you have found this very strange and tragic story interesting, and as I did say at the start, I thought it was going to be a long one, and it is. It's actually longer than the one that I recorded and lost, so it does prove that sometimes these end up longer every time. There's always a change. I never know what it's going to be until I get to the end, and now I'm waffling and making it even longer, so I'm going to go away before I say anything more, because I've had to record this actually on the morning that I'm going to post it, so I've now got quite a lot more work to do to get this one finished. So if you have made it to the end, I am really grateful, because it's been a very busy morning. So I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again next week.